The guard laughed at me, not a polite little chuckle, a real full laugh that bounced off the marble walls of the lobby, and that was the moment my life split in two. My name is Howard Calloway. I am 57 years old. I have been a CPA for over 20 years, and until that Thursday afternoon in October, I believed I had a solid, honest life. A paid-off house, a son I was proud of, and a wife of 28 years named Carolyn. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest. I'm not a dramatic person. I do not make scenes. I do not spiral. What I do is look at the numbers until the picture becomes clear. That habit saved me. It started with a simple idea. Carolyn had been grinding through another brutal stretch at Vantage Solutions, her company. 12-hour days, 14-hour days. I had been eating dinner alone most nights, watching the news by myself while she texted me about board meetings and client emergencies. That Thursday morning she rushed out before her coffee finished brewing. I thought, why not bring her lunch? Just show up, say hi, remind her that someone at home was thinking about her. I pulled into the visitor parking at her downtown building just after 1 in the afternoon. I had only been there a few times over the years. Carolyn always said it was better to keep work and home separate. I respected that. I respected too many things I should have questioned. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of space that makes a guy in khakis feel slightly out of place. I walked up to the security desk, carrying a coffee in a paper bag. The guard's nameplate read Dennis. Afternoon, I said. I'm here to see Carolyn Calloway. I'm her husband, Howard. Dennis looked up from his monitor. His expression shifted, not rude, just genuinely confused. He tilted his head like I had said something that did not quite add up. You said you're Mrs. Calloway's husband. That's right. I brought her lunch. I held up the bag. I already felt a little foolish. Then Dennis laughed. That real caught-off-guard laugh. It echoed across the marble floor. Sir, I'm sorry, he said, still recovering, but I see Mrs. Calloway's husband every single day. He gestured toward the elevator bank. Actually, there he is right now. I turned around. The man walking toward us through the lobby was younger than me, late 30s maybe, well-dressed, dark hair, confident stride. The kind of man who moves like he owns every room he walks into. I knew exactly who he was, not because of Carolyn. Because of my son, that was Adrian Hale, my son Tyler's fiancé. The man Tyler had been with for 2 years. The man our whole family had welcomed. The man Tyler was planning to marry in the spring. Adrian nodded toward Dennis on his way past. Afternoon, Dennis. Carolyn asked me to grab the Henderson file from the car. No problem, Mr. Hale, she's in her office. Adrian glanced at me for just a second. Something moved across his face, not panic, not surprise, just recognition. He knew exactly who I was, then he kept walking. Dennis was watching me. Sir, are you all right? Fine, I said. I think I have the wrong building. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the steering wheel for a long time. I did not go home right away. I drove for about an hour with no destination. My brain does not panic. It organizes. It starts pulling threads and following them until the shape of a thing becomes visible. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo on my lock screen. Tyler and Adrian at their engagement announcement, smiling on a pier somewhere. Adrian in the same easy, confident pose I had just watched cross the lobby of my wife's office. I thought about all of Carolyn's late nights, her early mornings, her quiet suggestion, years back, that I did not need to visit the office. It's easier to keep things separate, Howard. Yes, I imagine it was. She made $185,000 a year as CEO. I made around $110,000 running my accounting practice. I had always felt good about contributing equally to our shared expenses. I had always thought we were building something together. I was wrong about that. When I got home, I said nothing. I made dinner. I watched the news. When Carolyn came in around 9, I asked how her day was. She said exhausting. I said mine was quiet. We went through the whole evening like it was any other. She fell asleep quickly. I lay on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and started making a list in my head. The thing about being an accountant for 2 decades is that you learn to be patient with incomplete information. You do not guess, you gather. You build a picture from what is verifiable and you do not move until the picture is complete. I gave myself 1 week before I touched anything. That was the most disciplined week of my life. The first break came by accident. 4 days after the lobby, I was hanging up Carolyn's blazer. She had dropped it over the dining chair when she came in that evening, same as she always did, and I picked it up to put it in the closet. A keycard slipped out of the inside pocket and landed on the floor. Hotel logo, the Greystone Suites, about 20 minutes across town. I stood there holding it for a moment. Then I photographed it with my phone, put it back in the pocket, and hung the blazer up like nothing happened. That night, after Carolyn fell asleep, I opened our joint credit card statements on my laptop. I had not looked at them carefully in years. Carolyn handled our finances. She made $185,000 a year, and I made around $110,000 from my practice. And it had always felt reasonable to let her manage the bigger picture. I trusted her with it the same way I trusted her with everything else. That trust had cost me. I went through 24 months of statements, line by line. Hotel charges at the Greystone Suites, twice a month on average. Restaurants I had never been to, a jewelry purchase for $340 in March, a weekend at a mountain resort in June that Carolyn had told me was an executive leadership retreat, gas station charges in neighborhoods nowhere near her office or our house. I opened a new spreadsheet and started logging every entry that did not belong. By 2 a.m, I had documented just over $21,000 in charges across 2 years. Money from our joint account, money I had helped earn, spent on a life I knew nothing about. I closed the laptop and went to bed. The next morning, I went through the calendar on her laptop. She had left it open on the kitchen counter, same as she did most mornings. I had never looked through it before. It took me about 3 minutes to find what I needed. Recurring entries every week without exception. A lunch, Tuesday 12:30. A dinner, Thursday 700. A weekend blocked off as retreat that matched the mountain resort charge in my spreadsheet almost to the dollar. A was Adrian. I already knew that. But seeing it laid out in her own calendar, organized and recurring and deliberate, made it real in a way the lobby had not fully managed. This was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a schedule. This was a second life maintained with the same precision Carolyn applied to everything she did. I called a private investigator that afternoon. His name was Phil Garrett, a former insurance fraud investigator recommended by a colleague who had used him in a business dispute. I met him at a diner 2 miles from my office. I brought the spreadsheet, photographs of the key card, and printouts of the calendar entries. He looked through everything quietly, asked 4 or 5 direct questions, and told me he could have a documented file ready in 2 weeks. What exactly do you need? He asked. Dates, locations, photographs, anything that establishes a consistent pattern, I said. I need it to hold up. He nodded. It'll hold up. While Phil worked, I kept my routine exactly as it had always been. I made dinner. I asked Carolyn about her day. I watched the news. I slept on my side of the bed. Carolyn noticed nothing different, which told me something about how well she had learned to not look too closely at me. At the end of the 2 weeks, Phil handed me a folder at the same diner. Photos of Adrian and Carolyn entering the Greystone Suites on 6 separate occasions. Photos of them at dinner at 3 different restaurants. A timeline showing 22 documented meetings over the investigation period alone, all cross-referenced against dates in her calendar. I paid Phil, thanked him, and drove straight to the office of Ellen Pruitt. Ellen was a family law attorney with 25 years of experience. A colleague had used her in a complicated divorce 2 years earlier and said she was sharp and did not waste time. She did not. I laid the full file on her desk, Phil's documentation, the credit card statements, the spreadsheet, the calendar printouts, and I watched her go through it without saying a word. When she looked up, she said she's been drawing on marital assets for at least 2 years. That's not just infidelity. That's financial misconduct inside the marriage, and it significantly affects how a judge will view the division of assets. How significantly? I asked. Significantly enough that her original plan, whatever it was, is not going to work the way she expected. I asked Ellen to start preparing the paperwork, not to file yet. I had one more thing to do before anything became official, and it was the thing I had been dreading since the afternoon I stood in that lobby and watched Adrian Hale walk past me like I was a stranger. I had to talk to Tyler. My son was 28 years old. He was an architect, worked for a firm downtown, had been with Adrian for 2 years, and was genuinely happy in a way I had not seen him be since he was a kid. He had no idea, not even a suspicion. I was certain of that, and I was about to take that happiness apart. I called him on a Sunday and asked him to stop by the house. Tyler showed up at 11 on Sunday morning while Carolyn was at a board lunch. He came in good mood, talking about a project his firm had just landed, something about a mixed-use development downtown. I made coffee. I let him talk for a few minutes. Then I sat down across from him at the kitchen table and slid the folder across without saying a word. He opened it. The first page was the credit card summary. The second was Phil's timeline. The third was the photos. He went quiet almost immediately. I did not watch his face. I looked at my coffee cup and let him read at his own pace. The kitchen was completely silent except for the sound of pages turning. It took about 10 minutes. When Tyler closed the folder, he did not say anything right away. He just sat there with both hands flat on the table, looking at the folder like it might say something different if he waited long enough. Then he asked how long. Best I can tell, close to 2 years, I said. He nodded slowly. Does she know you know? Not yet. He picked up his coffee, then put it back down without drinking it. He looked out the kitchen window for a long moment. When he turned back, his expression was controlled in a way that reminded me of myself, which made it harder to look at. I need a few days, he said. Take whatever you need, I told him. I'm not filing anything until you're ready. He took the folder with him when he left. I stood on the front porch and watched his car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been tight for weeks. Not relief exactly, more like the particular quiet that comes after you have done something that needed doing and cannot be undone. Tyler called Adrian on Wednesday evening. I do not know exactly what was said between them. I did not ask, and Tyler did not offer. What I know is that by Thursday morning, the engagement was finished. That same Thursday, I filed for divorce. Ellen had everything prepared and ready to go. We filed before Carolyn left for work. There was one more thing I needed to do, and I had been thinking about it carefully since the week I first opened those credit card statements. Adrian Hale was not just Carolyn's partner in her personal life. He was the director of operations at Vantage Solutions. Carolyn had promoted him twice in 3 years, each time with expanded authority and compensation that, according to the corporate filings I had reviewed, had never gone through proper board approval channels. She had restructured his role in his reporting line in ways that should have required a board vote. None of it had been disclosed to the board. None of it reflected the fact that she and he had a personal relationship that created an obvious and serious conflict of interest. I called Bernard Caldwell on Friday afternoon. Bernard was the chairman of Vantage's board of directors. I had met him 3 or 4 times at company events over the years. He was direct and fair, the kind of man who did not appreciate being kept in the dark. I kept the call professional. I told him I wanted to bring a corporate governance matter to his attention. I walked him through the structural changes Carolyn had made to Adrian's role, the promotions, the expanded authority, the absence of board documentation, and the undisclosed personal relationship that underlay all of it. I did not editorialize. I stuck to what was in the documents. Bernard was quiet for a long stretch after I finished. Then he said, "I appreciate you bringing this to me directly, Howard." That was all he said. It was enough. The board launched a governance review within 10 days. I was not involved in what happened after that. I did not need to be. I had shared factual information with the people who had a right to it, and I let the process do the rest. Carolyn found out about the filing and the board review on the same Friday. She came home that evening earlier than usual, and I knew from the way she walked and that she already knew. She set her bag down with more force than necessary. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. It was not grief. It was not guilt. It was the look of someone recalculating. "You called Bernard," she said. "I shared some information about corporate governance issues. Yes. That is my career, Howard. I shared accurate information with the people who were entitled to have it." I said, "The same way you spent 2 years making financial decisions with our joint money that I was not informed about." She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, "I did not think you were capable of this." I looked at her steadily. "I know you didn't." She went upstairs. I heard her on the phone for the rest of the evening, her voice tight and controlled behind the closed bedroom door. I sat in the living room and read for a while. Around 9, I made myself a sandwich and went to bed in the guest room. It was the first night in years I slept without waking up at 3 in the morning. The confrontation I had been bracing for came on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after the filing. Carolyn came downstairs while I was making coffee. She was wearing the pale blue robe she had owned for years, the one I had bought her for her birthday a long time ago. She looked tired in a way I had not seen before. Not the tired of long work days, but something deeper. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me without any of the professional composure she had been holding on to since Friday. "I want to talk," she said. I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. She started with what I expected. She said the marriage had been over for a long time. She said she had tried to tell me in ways I had not listened to. She said she had felt invisible inside our life together, that my satisfaction with things as they were had left no room for her to grow. I let her finish. Then I said, "I understand you were unhappy. What I don't understand is why 2 years of planning and $21,000 of our shared money was the answer instead of a conversation." She looked at the table. "I didn't think you'd understand. You didn't give me the chance to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I had not expected. She said, "I think I convinced myself that because I had already decided it was over, the rest of it didn't count as lying. That I was just managing a transition." "You were managing a transition?" I said. "I was your husband." She did not argue with that. What surprised me most about that conversation was how little anger I felt sitting across from her. I had expected something to break open when it finally came to this point. Instead, I just felt clear, like a set of numbers that had finally balanced after weeks of not adding up. The picture was complete, and there was nothing left to calculate. I asked her one question I genuinely wanted the answer to. I asked her when she had decided it was over. She thought about it for a moment. She said it was not a single decision. She said it had been gradual, a series of moments over several years where she looked at our life and felt something missing, and instead of bringing it to me, she had started looking elsewhere. She said that by the time Adrian came into the picture, she had already been gone for a long time in the ways that mattered to her. I told her I heard that. I also told her that hearing it did not change what she had done or how she had done it, that a person can be unhappy in a marriage and still choose honesty. She had not chosen honesty. She had chosen a plan. She did not disagree. We sat there for a while after that without saying much. The coffee went cold. Outside the kitchen window, the yard looked the same as it always had. The same oak tree, the same fence, the same patch of garden Carolyn had planted the second year we lived there and stopped tending about 6 years ago. At some point she said, "I really didn't think you had it in you to go to Bernard." "I know," I said. "That was your mistake." She almost smiled at that, not warmly. More like a person acknowledging a move in a game they had underestimated. Ellen called me the following week with an update on the settlement discussions. Carolyn's attorney had come back with a revised proposal. The documentation of the $21,000 in marital asset misuse had done exactly what Ellen said it would. The original proposal, which had been structured to heavily favor Carolyn, had been replaced with something considerably more balanced. Under the revised terms, I kept the house, which we had owned outright for the past 8 years. Carolyn kept her retirement accounts and her half of our savings, minus an amount that reflected the documented misuse. Ellen told me a judge would have gone further given the evidence, but a negotiated settlement was cleaner and faster. I agreed to the terms. The board review at Vantage Solutions concluded about 3 weeks after I filed. The findings were not made public in detail, but from what I understood through mutual professional contacts, the review confirmed that multiple personnel decisions involving Adrian had not followed proper authorization procedures, and that the undisclosed personal relationship represented a clear conflict of interest that should have been disclosed to the board. Adrian was terminated. His departure was announced internally as a mutual separation. Carolyn was placed on a formal performance improvement plan and required to report all significant personnel and structural decisions to a newly appointed COO who effectively reviewed everything she did before it went forward. The woman who had spent years building her identity around being the person in charge was now getting her decisions countersigned like a first-year employee. I did not feel satisfaction about that. Exactly what I felt was something closer to proportionality. She had made choices that had consequences, and the consequences had arrived. That was not something I had engineered out of anger. It was just what happened when the people who were supposed to know things finally knew them. Tyler called me the night the board decision came through. He said, "Dad, I heard about Vantage. How are you doing?" I asked. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Better than I expected. Honestly, that was enough for me." The divorce was finalized 4 months after I filed. I have heard people describe the end of a long marriage as a kind of death, and I understand why they say that. But what I felt when Ellen called to tell me it was done was not grief. It was something quieter, the particular stillness that comes after a long period of noise. I moved into a rental apartment across town while the paperwork was being processed. It was smaller than the house, 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, a balcony that faced west. I brought my books, my desk, my coffee maker, and not much else. I did not need much else. What surprised me most about living alone was how quickly it started to feel normal. I had expected it to feel like loss. Instead, it felt like space. I could read in the evenings without any undercurrent of someone else's restlessness filling the room. I could cook what I actually wanted to eat. I could sit on the balcony with a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning and not be aware of disappointing anyone by being content with exactly that. I had not realized how long I had been carrying the low-level weight of being not quite enough for someone. It is the kind of thing you do not notice until it is gone. Tyler and I fell into a rhythm of having dinner together most weeks, usually just the 2 of us, somewhere low-key, nothing that required a reservation. We talked about his work, my clients, things we had been reading, occasionally about what had happened, but less and less as the months went by. There was an ease between us that I do not think we had before, like something that had been slightly off for years had finally been adjusted. He was doing well, better than I had feared. He told me once, about 3 months out, that the hardest part was not the end of the relationship, but the realization of what the relationship had actually been. I told him I understood that more than he knew. The house sold in the spring. Carolyn moved into a condo closer to the Vantage Solutions office. I heard through people we both knew that she was navigating the new oversight structure at work, that the COO review process had been harder on her than she had anticipated. I did not follow it closely. It was not my situation to manage anymore. Adrian had relocated to a city about 4 hours away and taken a position at a smaller firm. I did not hear much beyond that and did not look for more. I moved back into the house after the settlement cleared. I had lived there for 20 years, and my name had been on the mortgage from the beginning. Walking back through the front door felt less like returning and more like arriving somewhere for the first time, which I know sounds strange but is the most accurate way I can describe it. I repainted the living room. I rearranged the furniture. Small things, but they mattered. I met Sylvia in the fall through a mutual friend, a low-pressure introduction over coffee that neither of us had particularly high expectations for. She was 55, worked in real estate, and had been widowed 4 years earlier. She was easy to talk to in a way that had nothing to do with effort. She did not need conversation to perform or dinners to be events. When I told her I liked quiet evenings at home, she said honestly, and without any trace of tolerance in her voice, "Me too." I did not realize until that moment how much of my life I had spent trying to justify that preference to someone who experienced it as a failing. I'm not going to tell you the last 28 years were a waste. I do not believe that. I have a son I would do anything for. I have a house that is paid off and a practice I have built with my own hands and a life that is, for the first time in a long time, genuinely mine. But I will say this plainly, because I think it is worth saying. Loyalty is not the same as passivity. Being a steady, dependable, faithful man is not a character flaw. And if someone in your life has spent years treating your reliability as something to be managed rather than valued, that is information worth paying attention to. I brought my wife a sandwich and a cup of coffee on a Thursday afternoon. The guard told me he saw her husband every single day. The man who walked out of that elevator was my son's fiancé. I did not explode. I drove home. I opened a spreadsheet. I let the numbers tell me the truth that I had been too trusting to look for on my own. And then I stopped making myself smaller for someone who had already decided I was not enough. If any part of this story sounds familiar to you, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop absorbing someone else's choices and start protecting your own life. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, just because you have earned the right to live honestly, and so has everyone around you. That is not revenge. That is just what it looks like when a man finally decides he is worth the same loyalty he has always given to everyone else.